Welcome. My name is Akaya Windwood, and I get the great honor of moderating this conversation between these astonishing people. We're going to have what I like to call an emergent conversation, and that is where they actually, the ALOK and Joy and Báyò actually don't have a clear sense of what I'm going to ask. Because what I'm wanting is to evoke their wisdom rather than just what they're thinking. So I'll ask a question, and then we'll have a pause, a brief pause in which they can collect their thoughts. And while we have that pause, I would invite the people witnessing this conversation or attending to this conversation to think about how you might answer it if you were one of these marvelous thinkers. So that's our intention. But before we begin, there are folks who may have visual impairments or who may be listening to this and not watching. So I'm going to describe myself, and I'll ask each of our panelists to describe themselves in terms of what they look like. So I am I'm 65. I'm a brown-skinned African-American woman in a blue shirt and short gray, almost white hair these days. Joy?
I am, oh man, I'm getting old too. I'm 70. I'm a light-skinned Native woman wearing turquoise resin earrings made by a wonderful young Native artist and wearing a brown kind of probably fake satin shirt with a nice image behind me by Frank LaPena, a wonderful artist, Northern California Native artist. Thank you.
Báyò?
I'm Báyò, and I'm wearing a green shirt today, bought specially by my wife. I have a pseudo beard. I'm struggling to grow out one as glamorous and as glorious as John's beard. I'm dark skinned. I'm pretty short, and I'm smiley. But I'm very pleased to be here.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. I am a brown-skinned, bearded, and makeup done up face with a white dress with colorful stripes, and I'm so excited to be here.
I might add that your hair matches your dress. So I want to appreciate
Totally
that too.
accidental, I promise.
I'm sure. All right. So my first question is, I'm going to tell a little story, then I'll ask a question. This summer I was away camping, and it was, we were sitting around the campfire, or standing around the campfire, and it was a public campfire. And I found myself standing next to a man who was about 6'4". He was a white man, big, maybe 275 pounds. And he was wearing a shirt that said, with a ragged American flag saying, "These colors don't run." And I took one look at him and said, oh, I know who he is. I know exactly what he stands for. And I had enough wine at one point that I turned to him and I said, tell me about your t-shirt. And we began to have a conversation about, it ended up around criminal justice reform, in fact, prison reform. And he saw himself as a protector he's a protector. And that it actually ended up that our conversation ended up where we actually agreed with each other that we needed to reform our prison system. But where we differed was how. And that conversation really reverberates with me, because at one point at the end I said, well, so maybe one of these days I'll come to your city and I'll wear that t-shirt, and then you can wear my Black Lives Matter t-shirt. And he was a Trump supporter, and he said, I would gladly do that. And I found myself thinking about that, have been thinking about it ever since. Like, what would it mean for me to show up in his city and wear these colors don't run, and him wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. And what I learned from that was that I'm often wrong in my assumptions. That I think I know something about someone who I would call other, and I'm often wrong. So my question to you and to our audience, my first question is, when was a time you took the risk to bridge towards someone you saw as other? And if you took that risk, what did you learn? And anyone can start. George?
One time I was on a subway in New York City going way up where the the museum used to be, way, way, way up on the upper west side, like way up. And it was around 5 o'clock, 4:35, and there was a worker on there. He was real beefy, big white guy, and had a lunchbox between his feet. And I started making all kinds of assumptions about him. And then that wise voice inside me said, okay, back up. I did not have an interaction with him physically, but I sat there. I became him. I don't know how to explain it, but I let go. I've learned that judgment gets me in all kind of trouble, and it hurt boomerangs, like you were saying, it boomerangs. So I just sat there and I thought, what, you're being judgmental. I just let it go. I had this incredible, almost like a cosmic consciousness experience where I let it go and I was him. And I could feel his love for his family, how hard he was working, what his day had been like, what he yearned for, and how out of place he felt around people that, he assumed, I guess, might be judging him. And I don't know. I don't really know quite how to explain it, because it's not like one of these things and then we talked and da-da-da-da-da. But it was like, it blew something open in me, and it was like a lesson. It was a huge lesson, and I walked away feeling a lot lighter, so to speak, a lot lighter, and realized that how much I place judgment, that it is so easy to immediately jump to judgment over with assumptions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I found myself lassoed back to the small town in Texas that I grew up in at the beginning of the pandemic. And this was building up to the US presidential election. And here I was in like a very red town in a very red state. And as a gender nonconforming person, oftentimes my physical safety is up to question depending on where I am. And so I was toning it down, whatever that means, but still insisting on having bright fuchsia nails. And I was exercising outside with this fitness instructor. And he was kind of prototypical American Southern masculinity on the power weightlifting team. And we ended up actually developing this really beautiful friendship where at the end, he told me that he looked up who I was at the end and said, I'm so sorry I never asked you for your pronouns. I'll do that going forward. And by the way, watching you paint your nails made me feel like I could paint mine too. And it was this really beautiful moment of me being like, oh my gosh, I didn't see this person as part of the work that I was doing. I was defending or protecting myself such that I didn't allow for there to be the capacity for transformation or growth on my own end. And then it was one of those many moments of deep, a sort of humbling moment of being like, it's not just that we are enacting change, it's that change is being enacted onto us. And if we just see ourselves as change agents and not also recipients of change, then we lose out on so much.
Thank you. Well, my experiences are resolutely non-American. So I have struggled to answer this question in my head because I come from a culture that is where the kind of identity-based othering is difficult to do based upon the cosmovisions, the cosmologies that we were grown up in. The idea that identity is not stable, that our bodies are migrant, that we are spread out and diasporic and part of the ecology. But I did find myself struggling um, with sentiments when I came to India to live a couple of years ago. My wife is Indian, and I moved here from the university in Nigeria. Both of us started life here. And I noticed immediately the preference for fair skin here in South India, and how I was being noticed on the streets. That people will cluster and point and giggle. And because of my Pan-Africanist background, that didn't rub me the right way. And so I would go out frowning, basically. I would walk the streets frowning, go into the shopping mall frowning, just like this, because I didn't like the way I was objectified, seemingly objectified by the people in the neighborhood. And then one day my wife said to me, "Why didn't you say hello?" For once, just try greeting them. And you might find that what you have analyzed in your head as racialized treatment might be local curiosity. And the fact that they don't know how to associate or to, in their schemas, a black man is something rather unusual. And I can attest to that here in Chennai. And so I tried it out one day and said, "Hello." And it was basically, "Where do you come from? You know, why is your hair that way?" Which I probably would think is quite controversial across the Atlantic to say, but it was just a wandering and an exploratory, gushing wonder of what it meant to be me. I've been smiling ever since. Needless to say, it's difficult to have that idea that I'm being objectified these days.
Thank you. This is not a question, but I've asked myself a number of times, how do we be interested in one another, wonder about one another, and not be vampiric, right? Because there's a way that we can use our curiosity to actually diminish folks. And as John says, we have to get better at this. So I want to ask about loyalty. Loyalty is valued in many cultures, and it's often used to separate us. It's us who we are loyal to and them. And that's especially salient these days for folks of us on the left, because we're often very quick to other in order to show allegiance to our various causes. So how can we be loyal without othering? ALOK?
What if that's about being loyal to a cosmology that says we don't other? I don't think that loyalty has to be in contrast to these things. It's, for me, about what is the world, what is the point of view, what is the emotion, what is the sense of belonging that I am loyal to? not just what are the identities, right? Or who are the people, but rather what is the way of being or the practice of living that I'm loyal to. And for me personally, I'm loyal to the idea that we don't wait for heaven, we make it here on earth right now. I'm loyal that revolution isn't some abstract cataclysmic concept of the future, it's a daily practice of freedom. And so the way that I betray is not just when I betray my people, but when I betray my loyalty to that allegiance to that world that I'm building with every eyelash or every gesture. So I guess there's a way in which, for me, being non-binary is not just about a refusal of the distinction of man and woman, but also of us and them, and an insistence that I have to find the sliver of our enmeshment in everything that markets itself as dichotomous and antagonistic. My job on earth, I'm loyal to it, is to find the simultaneity in everyone and everything.
George?
I think I came up when I was appointed U.S. Poet Laureate as a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, a tribal nation that was moved illegally by Andrew Jackson and the U.S. government to Indian Territory, which then became the state of Oklahoma. It really brought up, and it does bring up, this question of loyalty. And so I've had to find a way to work it, of course, as a U.S. citizen, but also as a citizen of my tribal nation. And so the way that at least I work it is, I think, well, I'm loyal to Anugechka, or love. I'm loyal to unity, and that doesn't mean everyone being the same religion or everyone. I am loyalty to, there's loyalty to, for justice, for loyalty, for being upright, everyone being upright, and towards a kind of vision in which we all have a place in the story field. And that's how I find I've had to do that to maneuver. You know, I was put in this position because of poetry. Well, what has poetry taught me? You know, who are my teachers? But it's not always easy, because I have a tremendous loyalty to my people and to my family. But then I also see, you know, that this earth is a prison. And if you look at the earth from the moon, which is possible without aircraft, then you see that we are essentially a prison. And so my loyalty, I suppose, is to an integrity in which we all have a place, all that refreshes and you know, there's my loyalty. That's not easy, and that's not without edges and contradictions and compromises.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I am with it right now.
So this was surprisingly a difficult question to eat, to chew. It tasted different in my mouth. Again, referencing the Yoruba people of West Africa. Sometimes when I travel to the United States, or or anywhere that is not Africa or Asia, I find that people are usually angry if someone other than myself is doing some kind of ritual with the that is for the Yoruba people. For instance, maybe singing a Yoruba song or greeting elders in a Yoruba way, or saying ashe or something like that, especially a white man, right? And people will come to me and tell me, why don't you call that person out? This is cultural appropriation. But if you travel down to Nigeria, you would find people celebrating that fact because, again, identity is a very loose concept where we come from. We celebrate those acts. If people mispronounce my name, for instance, Yoruba people are most likely to say, well, the mispronunciation is another instance of my name that I'm coming to meet as if for the first time. So thank you for giving me that gift, right? So it's an entirely different ethos and trope that is at work. And at the same time, I know that there are core boundaries. There are boundaries that we protect, that we do not want transgressed. Um, so there is a sense in which I want to pose a question as well in response, and it doesn't require an answer at this time. But is there a way to be loyal that is not already simultaneously a process of creating others? Um,
Hmm.
isn't othering is othering a human is othering entirely human, so it's limited to human discourse and our social transactions? Isn't it also a social material process that the world is creating others and that we cannot resolve this with our rituals or attempts at bridging? That there's something beautiful about that, but it has to be framed within the modesty and the humility of a world that exceeds us. Um, I'll just leave it at that for now.
Oh, just a little bitty question right there, huh? Either anybody want to respond to that? Because I'm finding myself going,
When I was thinking about this, I started thinking, well, we are othered as soon as we are born from our mothers. The process starts because we're othering in order to find, we're discovering who we are, which immediately is, in a way, is an othering process. So why does it have to be? Othering could also be a natural tendency towards diversity. It's when judgment.
Right.
Does othering
Right.
have to include judgment?
Yeah.
It's part of the natural process of emerging and becoming.
Or do we already do we come to meet those gestures and moves like judgment and othering as risky, situated, but local strategies at welding the world? That there is a sense in which there are strategies, they're what we have to do. And at the same time, in order to, let me put it this way, it's like a place-making ritual. That othering is kind of caught up in how we produce our realities, but it has its shadows.
Yes.
And it gets toxic at times. And the technology can create suffering and harm. So what do we do about that? But I'm quite hesitant to rule out othering, as some, to toss it out entirely, because I'm quite suspicious of every human manifesto to fix the world, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I was at Standing Rock a while back. Assuming you all know what that was. Water keepers keeping the oil pipeline coming from the north. And I remember standing there and looking across at this line of police. And they were in all of their uniforms, and they had their helmets on and their batons and their shields. And they looked, in this vast, amazing land, they looked like alien creatures. And I remember standing there going, I don't recognize who those people are. And yet, Judith said in her earlier conversation that it's important that we do set boundaries and we do hold lines. and that we block people when they need to be blocked. But how can we hold lines while preserving our social bonds? I mean, I was, if I listened to Thich Nhat Hanh, I was that policeman in the uniform as I stood across the river in where I was standing with those I was standing with. So can you talk about that tension between setting boundaries and preserving our social bonds with one another?
And Akaya, could you repeat the last bit? I lost you for a moment.
Sure.
A glitch of some kind. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
It's how can we set boundaries and hold lines while preserving our social bonds with one another?
I wonder if we might consider the enforcement of a boundary as the very way that we maintain our social bonds with one another.
Say more.
It's the very much, I'm doing this precisely because I love you, because the volatility of this encounter, that's what would rupture this sociality. And so for me, the reframe that I've had to give myself is that boundaries are not borders. They are erected, but they can also be taken down so easily if the behavior shifts, right? So the way that we name is, if we return to our allegiance to a better world now, until you meet me here, when it's your laugh and your feet and your tears, not this masquerade, then we can't actually have that sociality that we hunger and deserve. And I feel like also one of the shifts I've made in my work was I was trying so desperately to bring in people into the sort of consciousness that I was in that I forgot to do my own work. My work became recruiting other people into it rather than me actually doing it with myself, the quiet revolution of I am. And in fact, I began to believe in the potential of other people more than they believed in their own potential. And what I've realized around boundary placing is it's also a way of saying, you have to trust and believe that other people can find their own path to liberation without you. Like, why do we think that we are going to be the catalyst, or we're going to be the torch, or we're going to be the thing, the spark? Why can't we trust that other people can do that work without us? And so I've had to challenge to actually say, I can't cocoon other people. I have to believe in their ability to transform too. And sometimes the boundary comes from that love, an ability to say, I trust your capacity to do this work on yourself.
I hate that part. Wouldn't it be easier if we could just be in charge of other people and make them change all at once? I mean,
right. Easier.
We'll just put you in charge. Look, you just be in charge of it all.
I keep thinking of Gloria Anzaldúa and her groundbreaking work. And I think about how she thought about borderlands, which in a way becomes no longer a border, but a space with a power center. And I keep thinking I tried to make it up to Standing Rock. I had jobs. I could not, there's one moment I could get away. They said, don't come up. It's snow and everybody's going. But I could see, and as you were speaking about standing there in that line, and I saw many images and videos, I kept going, like taking the eagle view and going up and looking at everyone there together, in this place of confrontation. And I wonder about, I see myself on a certain side of it, of course, standing up for water, the land. But I wonder too how, if any, how it changed, or what those people thought who were shooting rubber bullets and hurting people I mean, it was hard. Watching that was so painful because for all of us, it brought back all of those images, civil rights images. It brought back Trail of Tears. It brought back all of that here and now. When a lot of my generation thought we had, we had done the work, but as we know, it's ongoing. It doesn't end. But it helped me, Anzaldúa helped me think about that as like these so-called liminal spaces, or spaces where there appears to be no meeting place. Can also potentially be places of empowerment. Tricky places between genders, tricky places between, like I say, half myself is demanding reparations from the other half. these tricky places, but they become places of empowerment. Ultimately, there might be chaos, like this place of that we're dealing with right now, all of us on Earth. Where the Earth is trying to decide whether she is going to do away with human beings or allow them to continue. We're all of us right now are in kind of a global place like that together.
May I?
Please.
I want to take that thread and stretch it out a bit. I was as a subject that is continually facing empire, and I speak about traveling specifically to the United States. Um, I have a sense, maybe an immigrant's sense, that the most powerful part of the United States of America isn't the White House, but its borders. Because it's the border, it's the membrane where the practices of coherencing, where these transactions are continually processed, where what it means to be a citizen is enforced, and what it means to be a traveler, a visitor, is chucked out or enforced just as well. Um, so I'm deeply attracted to the notion of cracks, right? Cracks in the borders, cracks in membranes. The idea that boundaries and borders are never totalizing, never complete. That's something about those practices, because I want to see them as practices instead of resolute things, in a world made up of things. I want to see them as relationships, right? Ancestral, archetypal, cybernetic, right? They're ongoing relationships. So something about that invites me to notice that even our practices of coherencing ourselves are always leaking. We're always spilling. We're always becoming other, right? It is impossible to stabilize the self. It is impossible to stabilize even our social bonds. Maybe that's where we premise decoloniality, right? That's what we premise it upon, this idea that even oppression can never be totalizing or complete, that my capture can never be full, that there's some place that I can spill out. Like a Mobius strip is the inversion of the internal, making it the external in the self same moment. That's how I think of borders and boundaries. Yeah.
I'm going to take a breath right here and invite our audience and invite you all to just take a breath. Whew. I'm really loving the notion of boundary as inherently relational. I had been thinking about it slightly differently. So I think it was you, Báyò, who said identity is not stable. And, we've come to understand, and it came up in the conversation between John and Judith, that gender is a social construction. It's something you've been studying a lot and living, ALOK. We also know that race is a social construction. So if we know and understand that gender is multidimensional and fluid, can we apply that fluidity to race? And specifically, I'm thinking about several years ago when Rachel Dolezal was pilloried for behaving in the world as a Black woman, identifying in the world as a Black woman, and when it became clear through her family that they said, no, she's actually white, we literally canceled her whole, and I saw it happen, and even then I found myself going, something's not right about this. Because she was trying to live legitimately as a Black woman. And I found myself sitting in two places, like, how dare she? And she's not wrong. So let's talk, if you will, around the fluidity of identities and who gets to own them and how. And can we do that without automatically setting up an othering?
I'd like to jump in because in my book, I wrote about Rachel Dolezal, and I had the same feelings, right? The same feelings about it, of two minds about it. I even reference Ice Cube's remarks about, drawing the line in the sand when he was on some show. I can't remember. Maybe it was Bill Maher. Um, but here's my thinking about it, and I want to reference what John said in his conversation with Judith about the uncritical essentialism that is part and parcel of modern settler epistemologies. Because what modernity is good at proliferating is images, right? It flattens bodies, lives, experiences, ecologies into an image, right? And the image becomes presentable. What's obscured by the image is the algorithm, the idea that we are constantly ongoing, speciated becomings, not even beings, right? This is what Yoruba people refer to as aye, which the Englishman poorly translated as life. Very poor translation. Aye means something deeper, something much more conspiratorial than life. Um, I feel, and this is where I came up with the term transraciality as opposed to transracialism, which is what they say Rachel Dolezal was doing, adopting or co-opting another race. That even race itself is a becoming. That if we see bodies as static, right, um, individuated, already predetermined with their features and characteristics intact, then we're seen like the nation state, right? But if we see bodies as fluid, as movement. I can't remember if it was Judith that said this or Karen Barad, but that bodies do not precede movement. Movement precedes bodies. It is, in fact, movement that becomes bodies. When we see the world through movement, then it is impossible for us to stabilize race as the property of any given body, right? Then race itself becomes migrant and diasporic and impossible to capture.
Is your silence one of thinking or?
An angel passed the room.
Yeah, right.
I don't know quite where to go with this without, because the Dolezal, we have like hundreds of them, and hundreds of people who are saying they are Native American when
That's right.
some of it is genuine, some of it is it's, and I think the difficulty there is it has to do with authority of experience. There's something about authority of experience, but I also had the same, the Dolezal experience too. It brought up it brought up the questions that you're thinking about fluidity of identity. And I'm not sure really what more to say right now. I have all kinds of, I have a lot of thoughts about it.
I found myself, as I watched that unfold, that how I interpreted it from a spiritual place was very different from how I interpreted it from a political place.
Right.
And that's where it got tricky, right? Again, I was kind of talking to myself. Oh, look, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to sort of add that the project of modernity is not just one of flattening to image, but also flattening to body. And that the sort of plane of inquiry becomes about physicality and physical features, as if not like a whole other world or worlds. And it's no coincidence that racial demarcation happens and enables sex and gender demarcation later in the 19th century. That it's about paying attention first to the physical features of race through pseudoscientific practices like phrenology, that 19th century Victorian scientists are able to extrapolate into female and male. And of course, when they said man and woman, they meant white woman and white man.
That's true.
Because to them, all racialized people were sexually ambiguous or incapable of racial evolution into the binary, right? And what I notice reading and engaging with the work of 19th century science is how obsessed they are with the body and how they can't imagine or think beyond the body. And as a trans person, I find myself in that trap over and over again, where the only ways that my gender becomes legible is through bodily display. And when in fact, what I'm actually arguing is something more energetic. I know I'm not a man, not because of what I wear or what my body is, but because of who I am. And I think what we're struggling here is the parameters of am and how those parameters are set. And if we return to the question before, borders are enforced around the parameters of am that reduce us to a body. So maybe the spiritual crisis that we're also feeling here is, where is the room to talk about a soul, or where is the room to talk about a way of being in a world that reduces us to our bodies? And how can we hold the simultaneity of wanting to dismantle a colonial modernist project that makes us into commodities and bodies, while also being enmeshed in that political economy, right? And I think that raises a larger question of like, what are the ethics of being a part of that which is destroying us? And I think that that's really the conversation I'm interested in really having. And what excited me about this convening is there seems to be this reliance on a purity of saying, this is coloniality, I am outside of it. But what if we begin from the fact of saying that we are not outside, and that eugenics is not over, it's the currency of how we relate to not just one another, but ourselves? What does it mean for me to say, I can say that my gender is energetic and I feel more affirmed when I participate in adornment? What does that mean? To hold the simultaneity is what I'm asking for, without judgment. Because I think that what we do right now is we create a metric of complicity by saying, oh, you have bought into this. But I don't think it works like that. I don't think the system is outside of us. I think we're all co-constituted in it. And any pathway forward has to begin from that mutual imbricatedness.
Right.
I think that that's what this scenario really brings up for me.
ALOK, we have to hook up. Just a high five. We're just, here you go.
Oh, fine. Leave us out. That's all right. We don't have any feelings about it.
All right. I don't want to other my auntie.
No. Y'all just go ahead on with it. Joy and I can have a good conversation. We'll be just fine. But
you're othering me.
Oh, poor baby. All right. Joy, you recently said, and I have the advantage here because I heard you and you didn't know I was hearing you, but you said, let history lay down for a while. And I found that statement both deeply comforting and equally unsettling. in a world where all of us in this conversation have been deeply othered, and I'm sitting with other as a not a wonderful thing here. What are the gifts and challenges if we were to, quote, lay history down, even for a while, even for a minute?
It's like laying the burden down. It's a burden. I'm letting it lay down. I'm
okay,
letting
I hear you.
let it lay down here for a while.
I feel the gift of laying a burden down. I mean, there's a, I'm thinking about an old spiritual, which we talked about, lay that burden down. But what do we risk?
May I say something here? Joy, is that okay? Okay. That the back home, well, this is home, but where I come from, there are stories told about the slave ships, and these stories are counter historical. They are not just stories of capture. I'm sure all of us here uh, have probably heard the story of the Igbo landing of 1803. Um, in the eyes of the plantation owners, recorded in their diaries, those 75 or so Igbo people killed themselves. They walked into the waters and they died. Such a waste of resources. Um, and that's how, modern cosmovisions think of accountability, a stating of the facts, that history is a single line that proceeds from the present to the past, and the telling of it in the way that it ought to be told. This is deeply positivistic, is accountability and responsibility, and I don't even want to invoke scientism here. um, but I've always come to reckon with, these indigenous notions that the world is too real to be taken literally. The world must stray away from algorithms of historical burdens, right? We have to veer here and there. And so our people tell the stories of tricksters sneaking into slave ships, crossing the Atlantic to creolize the West, right? So even the phallic symbol in Washington, I don't know what it's what's that thing in Washington D.C.
The monument, yeah.
The monument, right? It's said to be Issue's penis, right? The god of tricksters and all of that. That's Issue, the Yoruba trickster god. And this, this idea that even hip hop, the story is that it came from griots in West Africa, and that it didn't just emerge from the Bronx or in New York. So this idea is quite central to how we frame and how we create knowledge, that there isn't the colonialists' notion of history. There are rhizomatic realities, and we paint them in story and song and tears and grieving and cooking together. So I really hear Joy when she says, laying the burden of history down.
I think it speaks to also how we're trying to develop a new language for time outside of, as it's been defined as past, present, and future, because that just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Like we are all three at the same time, and more than three. So I'm ready to lay down history if history just means what they've meant it to mean, which is happened in the past. But I can't lay down history when it's just in me, right? And so I think also what I see in your formulation, Joy, is lay down the ways that they've defined history, and let's invite or inaugurate another way of thinking around temporality. And what that way of thinking about temporality for me really works through is something that I've been thinking a lot about, is how the discourse around healing from generational trauma, we inherit trauma from our ancestors, but what if we can heal backwards? Like, let's think about those ways of queering time. Things that are rendered impossible with this kind of linear trajectory. How do we queer time to get out of that linearity? Is, for me, what I describe getting dressed as is making a living monument to my ancestors. That actually I'm laying an altar on my body to pay homage to all the people who died or were criminalized or were thrown into prison for doing what I'm able to do every day. And an acknowledgement that there's no way that I could exist in public in New York City as a gender nonconforming person if it weren't for trans and gender nonconforming racialized people who were died and murdered and incarcerated for it. And a refusal to understand their life as ending with them, but also living on through me. So I think what happens is that we're living lives that, to bring up that conversation on mobility, continually supersede the parameters of language, time, space, geography.
Yes.
They're all mere suggestions, that the real way of being is outside of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Joy?
I had a dream. I was working on my last memoir, but it was one of those wide awake dreams. And I was carrying my 7th generation granddaughter into the story. When I've been there at the births of some of my grandchildren, somebody always brings them in. And there I was carrying her in. And I looked at her and I thought, oh, like you look at them and you think, you look at this, you see the story and you see their part almost. And you bless them and you say, oh, see who's come back. And I said, oh, you look like my daughter Rainey, your grandmother Rainey, and you look Japanese. I wonder what happened. I didn't say that, but you look Japanese. And I blessed her, and then I carried her into her story, 7 generations. But then what I was left with is like what you were saying, ALOK. It's like, it's not linear. I realized that it had already happened.
Mm-hmm.
I realized at the same time that it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized at the same time, too, that, it happened in the past.
Right. Right. Okay, let's take a breath. We're down to our last, let's say, call them 3 minutes. So this will be just a kind of a quick one for each of you. This work we're doing is long haul work. It's not going to be done tomorrow. So our job is to be, as Tia Hummingbird says, good ancestors. So when you look at your work in creating the possibility of this new world, what is one thing you want to leave to our 7th generation grandchildren? Just one thing you want to leave.
I want to leave glamour.
Excellent.
I'll say play. Playfulness.
A sense of beauty in the weave of complication.
Mm-hmm. I want to leave gratitude, particularly gratitude for the 3 of you. Thank you for an amazing conversation. Thank you for trusting me not to and send you the questions ahead of time. Thank you for bringing your wisdom in so very many ways, both in the past and now and in the future. We're all deeply blessed by you all, and I leave with a deep sense of gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meadow, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. So I'll hand